This is Finance Arcana. And today on episode 7 of Forbidden History, we are breaking down Hitler's hidden war on the Freemasons, inside the looting of Europe's secret lodges, and trust me, this story is wild. Huge stakes, insane twists, and a truth about global money that almost nobody talks about. Let us jump straight in. Here's the forbidden claim. Hitler wasn't simply targeting political enemies. He targeted one of the largest transnational civil networks in Europe, the Freemasons, with over 2 million members across the continent, including bankers, judges, diplomats, industrialists, professors, and military officers. The Freemason lodges formed a parallel architecture of influence long before the Nazi state seized power. They ran charitable funds, mutual aid systems, educational programs, and quiet back-channel diplomacy. They created trust webs that stretched across borders, and in a continent sliding into empire cycle decay and liquidity compression. The Nazi state saw such autonomous networks as existential threats. Here's the shock data almost nobody hears. By 1939, the Masons operated more than 10,000 lodges across Europe, many holding assets, libraries, archives, and endowments. To the Nazi state, obsessed with centralization, this wasn't a fraternity. It was an unregulated power structure capable of coordinating elites outside the party's control. But here's the twist. The Nazis didn't fear their rituals. They feared their connective tissue, the way members shared information, protected each other, and influenced public institutions. The Freemasons symbolized a decentralized system at a time when the state demanded absolute monopoly. Human cost followed immediately. Members were fired from jobs, hunted by the Gestapo, families ostracized. The villain, the Nazi state, had identified its first institutional rival. But the real war hadn't begun yet. Cliffhanger. Because the Nazis soon discovered that the Freemasons' true strength wasn't secrecy, it was the economic footprint hidden inside their lodges. To understand why the Nazi state launched a systematic purge of the Freemasons, we must understand what these Freemasonic lodges truly were. In the early 20th century, the Freemasons operated as a continental web of soft power. Their lodges served as meeting rooms for civic leaders, philanthropists, and thinkers who shaped public life. They funded schools, hospitals, orphanages, worker insurance schemes, and cross-border charitable missions. They maintained archives containing decades of political correspondence, donor networks, and influence maps. In an unstable Europe navigating geopolitical disequilibrium and structural fragility, this network functioned as a stabilizing infrastructure. And here's the twist. Stabilization was precisely what the Nazi state did not want. An autonomous trust network weakened the regime's monopoly on ideology, information, and liquidity. To the institutional machinery of Nazism, the ministries, the police apparatus, the party treasuries, the Freemasons represented a rival ecosystem, a quiet shadow of civic influence at a time when the regime pursued absolute vertical control. Reverse expectation. Freemasonry was not a secret government. But in periods of liquidity compression, even symbolic networks become resource competitors. Their buildings, libraries, endowments, and political capital made them targets for a state that needed assets and feared dissent. And the human cost? Thousands of civic leaders, teachers, judges, and veterans tied to lodges saw their reputations erased overnight. Their social capital vanished. Their communities fractured under state pressure. But the part almost nobody teaches is this. The Nazi purge of Masonic lodges became the test case for the economic looting machine that would later devour all of Europe. And a more dangerous institutional player was about to enter the arena. Cliffhanger. Because Berlin soon empowered a hidden bureaucratic engine that would transform the Masonic purge into a continental extraction system. The Nazi state wasn't a monolith. It was a competing ecosystem of ministries, party offices, and security agencies, each hungry for resources and influence. This incentive structure produced the real villains, institutions acting with predatory logic. The Gestapo wanted intelligence files. The Schutzstaffel wanted ideological purity. The Ministry of Economics wanted property. And the party chancellery wanted control. Together, they formed a multi-headed extraction apparatus. But here is the contradiction. The Freemasons posed almost no military threat. Their danger was symbolic and financial. They represented decentralized governance at a time when the Nazi state needed total compliance. Reverse expectation. The less power the Freemasons had in reality, the more dangerous the regime perceived them to be. That paranoia fed institutional incentives, accelerating the purge. Human consequences grew darker. Lodge officers were interrogated. Members disappeared. Entire communities lived in fear as the villain institution expanded its files and confiscations. And here is the twist almost nobody expects. The purge became a competitive marketplace. Agencies fought over who got to seize Masonic assets, creating a perverse incentive loop. Structural fragility inside the regime fed external violence. But a more secretive actor was about to enter the stage. Cliffhanger. Because one institution, almost invisible, would eventually weaponize the purge into a continental financial operation. As the Nazi state consolidated power, pressure on the Freemasons escalated through what Kindleberger would call the displacement stage, the moment when a system shifts from uncertainty to targeted aggression. The regime's propaganda engine began reframing the lodges from civic networks into alleged conspiracies, weaponizing fear to justify bureaucratic expansion. But here's the twist. This campaign wasn't ideological chaos. It was statecraft designed to unlock access to assets. The more the public feared the Freemasons, the easier it became for ministries to seize buildings, freeze accounts, and confiscate archives under national security. Shock reveal. By 1935, the Nazis had already cataloged thousands of lodge properties across Germany, mapping them like a pre-looting audit. And this part is almost never taught. Each ministry wanted a piece. The SS saw intelligence value. The Ministry of Economics saw real estate and cash. The Interior Ministry saw an opportunity to purge civil institutions of non-party influence. Institutional incentives were mutating into predation. Human consequences grew sharper. Members were fired en masse. Teachers lost classrooms. Judges lost courts. War veterans, who once relied on lodge support networks, found themselves ostracized, erased from civic life. Structural fragility was no longer a theory. It played out in shattered careers and frightened families. Viewer question: did the Nazi state target the Freemasons because of genuine fear? Or because the lodges were an easy source of wealth and influence? Comment below this video in the comments section, and let us know your thoughts on this. But what happens next changes everything. Cliffhanger. Because the first major seizure revealed a hidden mechanism inside the Nazi state, a mechanism built for systematic extraction. The first major domino fell in 1933, with the forced dissolution of Germany's largest Grand Lodge. On paper, the action looked like a simple ideological crackdown. But here's the shock twist. The Nazi state treated the lodge like a financially distressed asset, not a banned organization. Officials arrived with accountants, not soldiers. They inventoried furniture, art, archives, safes, and donor ledgers. It was a hostile takeover, disguised as moral purification. And this part almost never appears in documentaries. The seizure became the prototype for all future operations. Ministries discovered that lodge archives contained decades of correspondence with political parties, philanthropic institutions, and even foreign diplomatic contacts. That intelligence value dwarfed the symbolism. The villains, state institutions, understood quickly that the purge offered not just revenue, but leverage. Macro forces intensified the drama. Germany was navigating capital flight and liquidity compression. Every institutional rival with resources became a target. The Freemasons, with their libraries, real estate, and cultural influence, were low-hanging fruit in a system incentivized toward extraction. Human cost hit immediate ground level. Lodge janitors were interrogated. Librarians dismissed. Widows who depended on lodge pensions saw payments evaporate overnight. A social safety net collapsed in a single decree. But here is the twist that resets curiosity. During this first seizure, officials discovered a category of documents the public never knew existed: cross-border membership registries linking elites from Paris to Warsaw. And that discovery changed the scale of the purge forever. Cliffhanger. Because Berlin now realized it wasn't dismantling isolated lodges, it had stumbled onto a continental network ripe for exploitation. Here, the story darkens. The hidden actor behind the rapid expansion of the purge wasn't Hitler or the SS alone. It was the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. A bureaucratic brain designed to fuse intelligence, ideology, and economic extraction. Almost no viewers ever hear this. But the RSHA's internal incentives made it the most dangerous institution of the regime. It thrived on discovering enemies, categorizing them, and monetizing their eradication. For the RSHA, the Freemasons were a perfect target: decentralized, elite-linked, asset-rich, and politically diverse. Shock reveal: the RSHA created detailed files on more than 500,000 individuals with any connection to Freemasonry. This wasn't surveillance. It was economic mapping. Each file became a potential confiscation point: homes, savings, insurance policies, professional licenses, cultural artifacts. And here's the twist: the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, didn't just collect data. It sold influence maps to other ministries, turning repression into a market. Macro dynamics accelerated. Facing geopolitical disequilibrium and rising military expenditure, the Nazi state needed new revenue streams. Institutional incentives corroded boundaries. Agencies competed to prove their usefulness by identifying enemies whose elimination enriched the state. And the human consequences? Terrifying. Families discovered that a grandfather's lodge membership from decades earlier was enough to trigger interrogations. Children were denied schooling. Communities disintegrated under fear. But here's the part almost no one expects. The Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, would soon scale the purge beyond Germany, turning it into a continental project of looting and intelligence capture. Cliffhanger. Because the next stage of the crisis timeline begins when the Reich Main Security Office, RSH, exports its machinery into occupied C. Europe, and the real extraction system switches on. When the Nazi state moved beyond Germany's borders, the purge of the Freemasons shifted from an ideological operation to a full-scale continental extraction strategy. The invasion of Poland in 1939 served as the first testing ground. Within days, RSHA units seized Masonic buildings, archives, safes, ledgers, and ceremonial objects. But here's the shock reveal. These seizures weren't chaotic wartime grabs. They were executed using pre-written plans modeled after the earlier German operations. The villainous state machine was scaling its algorithm. Macro forces now collided. War drained liquidity. The Nazi treasury needed assets to stabilize a fragile wartime economy. Kindleberger's crisis theory tells us that when empires overstretch, they start stripping everything they can. And this part is almost never taught. The Masonic purge became a quiet but vital pillar of wartime financing. Lodges in Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France were raided not because they were enemies of the regime, but because they were resource clusters. Human costs soared. Community leaders disappeared. Archives containing generations of philanthropic work were burned or transported to Berlin. Families who relied on lodge-funded hospitals or schools lost vital support. Structural fragility was bleeding into society. But here's the twist. The RSHA discovered that many lodges held insurance reserves, charitable funds, and trust accounts, small in isolation, immense in aggregate. This discovery re-energized the purge, pulling in more ministries and more competition, and a darker stage was about to unfold. Cliffhanger. Because the next country the Nazis occupied held the largest Freemason networks in Europe, and breaking them would change the scale of the operation forever. When German forces entered France in 1940, the Freemasons faced an existential crisis. France hosted more than 400 active lodges, many embedded in universities, judiciary systems, and charitable institutions. But here's the shock twist. The Nazi state didn't dismantle these lodges immediately. Instead, they studied them. They mapped donor networks, cataloged buildings, and assessed which assets could be seized and which individuals could be coerced. It was looting, disguised as analysis. The fatal flaw emerged during this stage. The lodge's transparency, once their strength, became a vulnerability. Freemasonry kept meticulous records. Names, occupations, addresses, donations, cross-border correspondence. What had once been a civic archive now became a blueprint for institutional predation. The RSHA weaponized these records to track, interrogate, and strip resources from thousands. Empire cycle decay pushed the Nazi state toward more aggressive extraction. Institutional incentives mutated yet again, and ministries competed to identify which lodge assets could be converted into wartime liquidity. This bureaucratic rivalry accelerated repression. Human consequences were devastating. Teachers were fired, lawyers barred from practice, families expelled from homes that lodges had sponsored. A social fabric built over centuries was shredded in months. Viewer question: do you think the Freemasons could have survived the Nazi purge if their records had been more secretive or decentralized? Comment below this video in the comments section and let us know your thoughts on this. But here's the twist almost no one expects. Cliffhanger. Because in France, the Nazis uncovered a category of documents that changed their entire strategy. Documents that linked lodges to financial flows across the British Empire. The discovery of the Freemason document archive in France reshaped the purge into a global intelligence operation. Among the seized documents were letters, donor lists, and meeting reports detailing interactions between French, Belgian, Dutch, and British lodges. Shock reveal: some archives referenced accounts in London banks, philanthropic transfers to colonial institutions, and diplomatic exchanges stretching from Cairo to Singapore. Suddenly, the Nazi state realized the Masonic network wasn't just European, it was imperial. Reverse expectation. This didn't strengthen the Nazi position. It exposed the regime's own structural fragility. If the Freemasons had ties stretching into the British Empire, then destroying them wouldn't just silence a rival, it might erase a bridge of influence the Nazis desperately needed in a world of escalating geopolitical disequilibrium. But here's the twist. Instead of reassessing, the Reich Main Security Office escalated. They launched a full sweep across occupied Europe, targeting lodges, homes, banks, libraries, law offices, anything connected to the network. Reinhardt and Rogoff's framework shows that collapsing empires often lash out at symbolic enemies to mask economic decline. The Nazi state followed that pattern exactly. Human consequence? Thousands of individuals were categorized as politically unreliable, losing homes, jobs, pensions, and even citizenship rights. Communities that had relied on Masonic charity, orphans, widows, veterans, lost crucial support structures. And the crisis timeline was reaching its peak. The institutional villain of the story, the Nazi state, had evolved into a predatory architecture, hunting networks across continents. But an even more dramatic turn was coming. Cliffhanger. Because the climax of this operation wasn't the seizures, it was the moment the regime tried to convert ideological persecution into monetary gain on a global scale. By 1943, the Nazi state found itself caught in its own trap. The massive purge of the Freemasons, once framed as ideological purification, had turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. Ministries fought over seized assets they could not liquidate. Intelligence agencies hoarded documents they barely understood. And the RSHA, once triumphant, now struggled to justify the scale of its operations, as the economic returns failed to materialize. Shock reveal. Internal reports from Berlin admitted that most Masonic property provided more political value than fiscal gain. Translation. Their looting machine had overextended itself. Macro forces made this crisis devastating. War-induced capital flight, collapsing trust in state institutions, and escalating geopolitical disequilibrium carved open the structural fragility of the regime. The Nazi state needed predictable revenue streams, not symbolic victories. Instead, it had accumulated buildings it couldn't sell, archives it couldn't interpret, and international blowback it couldn't control. Reverse expectation. The purge meant to strengthen the state had weakened it, draining administrative time and political capital. Human cost, however, stayed brutally real. Former lodge members struggled to rebuild lives. Communities that relied on Masonic schools, hospitals, or mutual aid funds were left without support. Social cohesion in occupied regions fractured further as local populations saw philanthropic institutions vanish. But here's the twist few expect. The Freemasons' destruction didn't erase their influence. It created a vacuum. After the war, Allied intelligence used the surviving Masonic networks and the Nazis' own stolen archives to help rebuild Europe's civic infrastructure. and the layered mystery deepens. Cliffhanger. Because the modern world still carries echoes of this conflict, and the next section reveals how today's networks mirror the vulnerabilities and strengths of the lodges. Today, the story echoes in surprising ways. Modern institutions, corporations, NGOs, digital communities, form decentralized webs of influence similar to the Masonic networks the Nazis feared. Shock reveal. In moments of geopolitical tension, these networks often become targets for state pressure, surveillance, or economic restriction. Structural fragility emerges whenever centralized power confronts distributed trust. Here's the twist. Freemasonry once relied on physical lodges, handwritten ledgers, and local reputations. Today's trust webs use encrypted communication, distributed governance, and borderless data. And as a single illustrative parallel, not the subject, crypto networks embody this shift. A decentralized ledger resists seizure, not by hiding, but by distributing authority across thousands of nodes. It's the modern version of a principle the Nazis never understood. You can confiscate assets, but you can't confiscate trust without destroying yourself. Human consequences remain central. When modern states crack down on NGOs, activists, or dissident communities, it's often the most vulnerable who lose access to social support, education, and opportunity. The echoes of the Masonic purge still ripple through how societies negotiate power and autonomy. Viewer question: do you think decentralized networks today are stronger or weaker than the Freemasons were in resisting state power? Comment below this video in the comments section and let us know your thoughts on this. But what happens next changes everything. Cliffhanger. Because the hidden lessons of this story reveal the real mechanism that determined who survived and who collapsed when power confronted networks. When we strip away the ideology, the uniforms, and the spectacle of the Nazi state, a deeper pattern emerges, one that Polanyi, Kindleberger, and Reinhard Trogoff all warn about in different ways. Shock reveal. The war on the Freemasons wasn't just persecution. It was a case study in how collapsing systems attack networks they can't control. The Nazi state confronted a decentralized institution during a moment of empire cycle decay and responded with a predatory extraction model. But here's the twist: by crushing those networks, the regime destabilized the very social structures needed to sustain itself. Polanyi would call this a double movement. As states centralize power, society seeks to protect itself through local self-regulation. The Freemasons embodied that counter-movement. Their destruction removed a stabilizing force that could have absorbed shocks when liquidity compression intensified. Kindleberger reminds us that crises accelerate when leadership gaps appear, and the Nazis created that gap by eliminating civic elites who once mediated conflict and provided community resilience. Reverse expectation. The lodges weren't obstacles to state power. They were insurance policies against systemic collapse. Their archives, funds, and relationships formed buffers against volatility. Without them, structural fragility amplified. Human consequences followed. Communities fractured. Charitable networks dissolved. And trust, the foundation of any economy, evaporated. Reinhardt and Rogoff warned that "this time is different" is always a lie. The Nazi regime believed it could replace distributed trust with centralized authority. It couldn't. The purge weakened the state more than it weakened the Freemasons' legacy. Money moves in shadows long before it moves markets. And the shadow lesson here reshapes everything we think we know. Cliffhanger. Because if the past is prologue, the next warnings aren't about history, they're about the future. If there is a future warning buried in the ruins of this forgotten conflict, it is this: whenever a state becomes obsessed with eliminating decentralized networks, it is signaling internal weakness, not strength. Shock reveal. The Nazi state displayed its deepest fragility, not on the battlefield, but in its panic over civic associations, lodges, unions, charities, cooperatives, intellectual circles. What happens next in any society facing similar pressures is rarely taught, but almost inevitable. Here's the twist. The same macro forces that shaped the 1930s geopolitical disequilibrium, liquidity compression, institutional overreach, and empire cycle exhaustion are reappearing today. And whenever these forces converge, states begin tightening control over NGOs, dissident groups, financial networks, and information webs. History offers the same pattern again and again. When centralized systems fear decentralization, a tipping point approaches. Human consequences in modern contexts are equally stark. When governments restrict civic networks, it's ordinary people, not political elites, who lose access to education, healthcare, mutual aid, or community safety nets. Structural fragility always cascades downward. Viewer question: are we entering a new era, where states once again fear decentralized networks more than traditional geopolitical rivals? Comment below this video in the comments section, and let us know your thoughts on this. The lesson becomes unsettling the more we analyze it. Cliffhanger. Because the finale forces us to confront what this forgotten war really reveals about power, trust, and the hidden architecture of society. In the end, Hitler's hidden war on the Freemasons was not about symbols, rituals, or conspiracy theories. It was about the oldest struggle in human history: centralized power against distributed trust. Shock reveal: the Nazi state, with all its military might and bureaucratic machinery, still could not fully destroy the lodges. Influence because it could not destroy the idea behind them, that networks built on voluntary trust outlast empires built on coercion. Here's the twist. After the war, many Masonic institutions quietly rebuilt themselves, drawing on surviving archives, diaspora networks, and preserved cultural memory. Meanwhile, the Nazi state, the villain of our story, collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Structural fragility triumphed over authoritarian design. That contrast reveals the emotional truth at the heart of this documentary. Power fades, but trust endures. Human consequences lingered. Families scarred by the purges rebuilt slowly. Communities recreated shattered institutions. The story is tragic, but also resilient. Tell us in the comments what topic you want us to uncover next. Comment below this video in the comments section, and let us know your thoughts on this. And our journey continues. Cliffhanger. Because the next episode dives into another hidden conflict where money, secrecy, and power collide, and the truth is even more explosive. Thanks for watching Hitler's Hidden War on the Freemasons, inside the looting of Europe's secret lodges. If this episode blew your mind even a little, smash that like button, share this video with someone who loves crazy finance stories, and hit subscribe so you never miss the next big reveal on Finance Arcana. We have more wild episodes coming in our forbidden history. You will not want to miss them.